It was raining on Curzon Street when the Duke of Hartwell first saw the woman who would change everything. Not heavily. The kind of October rain that came down sideways for a few minutes at the edge of evening and then forgot itself, as London rain so often did. Edmund Fairfax had come up from Wiltshire that morning for the opening of the autumn session, 3 weeks away now, and he had been thinking, in the carriage, of nothing in particular, of his late father's library, of a clause in the Working Women's Provision Bill that still needed teeth, of whether his housekeeper would have remembered the coffee. Grave things and very small things, in the easy way a tired man thinks them. He had asked the coachman to slow at Lady Grenville's house, only because he was carrying a polite letter for her that did not need answering and might as well be left. He never delivered it. He saw, through the rain-streaked window, the front door of the Grenville house thrown open from the inside, as if by a great breath of impatience. He saw the butler, a thin man in plum livery, a man Edmund had never thought twice about, step out onto the wet stone, one gloved hand at the back of a young woman's neck, the way a man might grasp a kitten, and pitch her into the street. Not violently, carefully even. Carefully enough that she did not fall, only stumbled 3 steps into the gutter, and stood there, with the rain on her bare head, and a small bound bundle clutched against her side. He saw her face. She did not weep. She did not turn back to the house. She looked for one breath up at the sky, as if something there might tell her where to go next, and then she lowered her head and began to walk. "Stop," Edmund said, before he had thought about it. The carriage halted. He opened the door himself. She was perhaps 25, no more. Her hair was a colour that was almost gold and almost brown together, the colour of wet wheat, twisted up into a working knot that the rain was beginning to undo. She wore the grey stuff dress and white cap of a senior housemaid, both new enough that the dye had not faded out of the grey, both wet through. Her bundle was a shawl tied around itself, lumpy with what could not have been more than half a drawer of belongings. Her shoes were not made for the street. He steps down. "Madam," he said, and that was an unusual word for what she was, but it was the word that came. The rain was making him forget himself. "Madam, are you hurt?" She looked at him, hazel eyes, very steady, very tired. She had clearly decided, while she was still on the step, that whatever happened next, she would not cry. The decision was sitting in her face like a piece of furniture she had moved into position. She said, "I am not hurt, sir." "Where do you go?" She did not answer at once. "I do not know," she said presently. Behind her, in the doorway, the plum-coated butler appeared again with a folded paper in his hand. He held it out at arm's length, as if it might bite him, and the rain spotted it dark. Edmund recognized what the paper was, in the abstract. A character, a recommendation, the small written thing without which a servant in London was a person without a profession. The butler said, "Her ladyship sends this after her." The young woman in the street did not look round. "Tell her ladyship," she said, in a voice that the rain made very small and very clear, "that I would rather not, sir." The butler blinked. Then he tucked the paper back into his coat and turned, with what seemed to Edmund a very small relief, and went back into the house and shut the door behind him. The woman in the street stood holding her bundle and did not move. It was at this moment that Edmund Fairfax, Duke of Hartwell, who had been raised on the principle that gentlemen did not interfere in other gentlemen's households, and who had not even known until that morning that Lady Grenville kept a senior housemaid by the name of anyone in particular, heard himself say something he would later not be able to explain, except by reference to the rain. "Will you come into the carriage?" he said, "for 10 minutes. I will not take you anywhere you do not name. I only mean to take you out of the wet." She looked at him a long moment. "Why?" she said. He could not answer that. He said, "Because I do not think a paper from her ladyship was the worst thing you refused tonight." She thought about that. Then she said, 10 minutes, sir." She climbed in. He shut the door. The carriage moved off down Curzon Street, and the rain came down a little harder, and Edmund Fairfax, who was 3 weeks from a bill that needed every favour he had, sat opposite a wet young woman with a wet bundle on her knee, and tried, in the dim of the carriage lamp, to think what he was now doing. "Her name," she said when he asked, "was Charlotte Reed." She gave it the way she had given everything else so far, simply, without ornament, watching his face for what he meant to do with it. She was, he saw now in the lamplight, very pale. The rain had cooled the colour out of her, but there was already something thin beneath the cool. She had not eaten since morning. She did not say so. "Miss Reed," he said. "Sir," she corrected him, very gently. "Your Grace, I think. I heard the coachman." He had hoped, foolishly, that she would not. "Edmund Fairfax, Hartwell." "Your Grace." "I'm not—" He stopped. He had been about to say, "I'm not asking you anything you would not wish to answer." He had been about to say, "I am not what your ladyship's butler thought I was." He understood, all at once, that she had spent the walk from the front step to the carriage door, wondering exactly that. He took a slow breath. He said, "I would like to take you somewhere warm. There is a respectable inn at the corner of Half Moon Street. They know me. They have a private parlour with a fire. I will pay for a room for you for tonight. I will not enter the parlour unless you ask. I will not enter the room at all. In the morning, if you wish, you tell me where you wish to go, and I will see you to it. That is all." "Why?" she said again. He looked at her. "Because," he said, "I do not think you have anywhere to go tonight that is dry." She closed her eyes for half a second. He saw, or thought he saw, the place beneath the cool where the decision not to cry had been made. He saw it tremble. Then it did not tremble. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. The Half Moon was a small inn that the Fairfax family had used for 50 years, the kind of place where the landlady remembered the previous Duke's preference for porter at supper, and asked after the boy with the marbles, who had once been Edmund. Mrs. Pell took one look at Charlotte's wet shoes and her wet hair, and her quiet face, and made up her mind without consulting Edmund at all. "Upstairs with you, my dear," she said. "There is a fire in the front parlour, and a hot bath in 10 minutes, and a hot supper in 20. And His Grace will speak to you again when you are warm, or not at all, as you prefer." "I should prefer to speak to him," Charlotte said. Mrs. Pell looked at her, hard. Then she looked at Edmund, harder. "Then there will be a tray for 2 in the front parlour, Your Grace," she said, with the door propped open, and Annie sitting in the passage with her mending. "That will do exactly," Edmund said. He understood. He was grateful. He waited downstairs. He drank a very small glass of porter. He thought of his father, who had used this inn the way other men used clubs, and had once said, in a voice Edmund had not understood at 16, but understood very well now, "The trouble with rank, boy, is that it never stops you doing a foolish thing. It only stops other people telling you you are doing it." He thought about the bill. He thought about the Lord Chancellor, who had asked 3 days ago whether Hartwell intended to spend the autumn session on the Working Women's Provision Act, in the face of Lady Grenville's settled opposition, and whether Hartwell had, in plain English, the stomach for it. He found that he very much had. 40 minutes later, he climbed the inn stairs with Mrs. Pell in front of him, carrying a covered tray, and Annie behind him, carrying her work basket and a candle. The door of the front parlour was propped open, as promised. Charlotte was seated by the fire, in a dry, borrowed gown that was a little too large at the shoulders, her hair brushed out and tied back with a piece of grey ribbon that Annie must have given her. The cool tiredness had not gone out of her, but the colour had come back. She looked, now, like a person, rather than like a person being held upright by weather. She stood when he came in. "Sit, Miss Reed," he said. "Please." She sat. He sat opposite, leaving Mrs. Pell to set out the tray between them. Soup, bread, a small pat of butter on a blue plate, 2 cups of strong tea, and to leave the door propped open behind her as she went. Annie sat down in the passage, with her work basket on her knee, and the candle on the floor, and her face quite turned to the window, very deliberately, as if she were the kind of girl who had been taught from infancy that the back of one's head was the most polite part of one. For a moment, Charlotte ate nothing. Then she picked up the spoon, slowly, as a person picks up a thing she has not been certain she would be permitted to touch, and began on the soup. He waited until she had taken 6 spoonfuls. "Will you tell me," he said, "what happened today?" She set down the spoon. "Your Grace," she said, "I shall tell you whatever you ask. I owe you the supper, and I owe you the dry shoes. I owe you the truth as part of those. But I should like you to know first, because I do not wish you to feel cheated by it later, that her ladyship has put about, this evening, a particular account of why I was dismissed, and I cannot offer you any witnesses against it. If, when you have heard me, you prefer to believe her account, I shall walk out of this inn in the morning and shall not trouble you. I should like that to be understood from the beginning." He looked at her. "Miss Reed," he said. "Your Grace." "I have not asked you to defend yourself," he said. "I have asked you what happened. They are different questions." She blinked. He saw, very briefly, the place beneath the cool again. "Yes," she said. "They are." It came out then, slowly, with the soup growing cold between them, and the fire steady in the grate, and Annie's silhouette in the passage perfectly motionless against the candle. She had taken service in the Grenville household 2 years ago last Michaelmas, as a chambermaid. Her referee had been the housekeeper at the Marbury estate in Wiltshire, where Charlotte had been parlourmaid for 3 years before that, and where the old housekeeper, a Mrs. Spence, whose name made Edmund glance up sharply, because his late father had spoken well of her once, had retired the year Charlotte left for London. Charlotte had been promoted to senior housemaid in the spring. She had had 2 half-days a month, the second Sunday and the last Wednesday, and she had spent both of them in Lambeth. "Lambeth, Your Grace," she said. "In rooms in Pratt Street, near the river." "Why Lambeth?" he said. She steadied herself with the cup of tea. "My mother lives there," she said. He waited. "My father was a clerk in the Marbury estate office," she said. "He died of a chill 4 years ago. My mother was a lady's maid at Marbury for 30 years before her marriage, and she had a small jointure from my father's service and a very little put by. We meant to take rooms together when I was old enough to manage in a London house. The wages were better than in Wiltshire. But 2 winters ago, my mother began to cough. Consumption? The physician at the hospital said it was not yet the worst kind. He said she might live to be old if she could keep warm and not have damp and could eat butter, which is to say, not on a lady's maid's pension. So I sent her my wages, Your Grace. The whole of them, after a 6pence I kept back for boots. Twice a month, on a half-day, you went to her. Yes, Your Grace. In secret. She set the cup down. Yes, she said. In secret. He understood. He had been turning over, even while she spoke, the small print of the kind of clause Lady Grenville liked to put in her servants' agreements. He had heard, from a man at his club, the phrase no dependence, and had thought at the time that it was a hardness of the modern world he could not stop. He understood now that he had been wrong to think he could not stop it. Her ladyship had a clause, he said. Her ladyship had a clause. And you signed it. And I signed it. 2 years ago last Michaelmas, in the housekeeper's room, with the housekeeper standing beside me and not, Your Grace, meeting my eye. Because she knew. Because she knew of my mother. Yes, Your Grace. She liked me. She did not say. I think she thought, as I did at the time, that 2 years would settle the matter one way or the other. He thought, with a quiet, even anger that surprised him by its steadiness, that he could perhaps cause Lady Grenville's housekeeper to find herself a better position by Michaelmas next. Tell me about today, Miss Reed. She told him. There had been, this morning, a great deal of fuss in the upper passage over a missing pair of gloves of Lady Grenville's. The gloves had been found, eventually, in Lady Grenville's own glove box, where she had put them and forgotten them. But in the search, a footman had been sent down to Charlotte's small box room under the eaves to look through her things in case she had taken them by mistake, which she had not. In Charlotte's box room, the footman had found, neatly folded under her Sunday gown, a packet of letters from her mother, 6 months of them, signed, "Your loving mother," and dated from Pratt Street. The footman had taken the letters to her ladyship. Her ladyship had had Charlotte fetched into the morning room at noon, and had asked her, in the soft voice she used for these things, whether the dependent was a husband she had not declared, or whether it was a child. "And you said—" "I said it was my mother, Your Grace, and that she was ill, and I begged her ladyship to permit the clause to be amended. I offered to do without my second half-day altogether. I offered to do without wages, even, if I might only keep my place, because without my place I could not pay the rent on Pratt Street, and without Pratt Street my mother had no roof at all." "And she said—" "She said," and for the first time the cool place in Charlotte's face did tremble. It trembled and held. "She said that a maid who had lied for 2 years about her dependence had probably lied about her conduct as well, and that she would not have it about her household that an unmarried Grenville servant had been creeping out at night to keep a man in lodgings, and that I was to have my things packed within the hour and be off the steps by 6. And there was, Your Grace, there was a paper. A paper. A paper that the morning room clerk had drawn up while we were talking. A confession, of a sort. It was very short. It said I acknowledged improper conduct with an unnamed gentleman of the household, and that I left my place by mutual consent. Her ladyship said that if I signed it, she would write me a character. If I did not sign it, she would not. You did not sign it. I did not, Your Grace. And so she has not given you a character. And so she has not given me a character. And, though I cannot prove this, and would not say it in a court, I believe she will put it about, with people who matter, that I left because I would not sign a confession she had drawn up out of compassion, which is a worse thing than the confession itself. Yes, he said. I expect she will. He looked at her over the cold soup. He said, Miss Reed. Your Grace. I will not pretend to think for 10 minutes about whether you have spoken to me the truth. I have spent 11 years in the Lords learning to know the difference, and you are speaking the truth. I will not insult you by saying I have decided so out of charity, or out of pity, or out of regret for a wet October evening. I have decided so because it is plainly the case. She did not speak. The cool place in her face had stopped trembling. It had become, instead, very still. Now, he said, I am going to make you an offer, and I want you to understand from the outset that you are not obliged in any way to accept it. If you do not accept it, you will sleep in this inn tonight, and tomorrow morning I shall arrange you a respectable lodging at my own expense for a fortnight. And during that fortnight, I shall procure you a position with a household I am willing to vouch for personally. You may take that fortnight's lodging on no terms but my conscience, and there will be no further claim on you from me of any kind. And if I do accept it, then tomorrow morning I shall take you out to Hartwell House in Berkeley Square. I am in need of an upper housemaid. My housekeeper, Mrs. Cole, has been saying so for a fortnight. The wages are £26 a year, the same that you had at Grenville, and you will have your 2 half-days a month and as many evenings as the work permits. And Mrs. Cole will not ask you about dependence. The clause does not exist in my house. It will never exist in my house. And my mother, Your Grace. He had been waiting for that. And your mother, he said. I should like, with your permission, to have moved out of Pratt Street, which is damp, and into a small cottage at the edge of the village of Stoke Fairfax in Berkshire, which is on Hartwell land. It is unoccupied. It has a kitchen garden and a south wall. The physician at Stoke Fairfax is a good man. He attended my father. I shall pay him, and the rent of the cottage will be set against my own household accounts. You will see your mother on your half-days, and as often besides as the work permits. The village is half a day from London by post-chaise, less if I send a carriage. That arrangement will continue for as long as you remain in my house, and it will not stop on the day you leave it, whenever and for whatever reason you leave it. Whoever you marry, Miss Reed, will not be asked to inherit the cottage rent. It will continue from my private accounts, as long as your mother lives. That is also part of the offer. The silence in the front parlour of the Half Moon was the kind of silence that fires made worse, by ticking quietly in the grate, as if marking the seconds against which one might still go back and say something else. "Why?" Charlotte said. He had been ready for her to say it again. "Because," he said, "Lady Grenville and I are going to disagree at the autumn session over the Working Women's Provision Bill. And I've spent the last 6 months telling myself I disagreed with her on principle. And tonight in the rain, I discovered that I disagreed with her, in fact, over you. I should rather disagree with her over a real woman than a principle, Miss Reed. I should rather know what I am defending." She looked at him for a long moment. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Reed, you will forgive me. The offer is too good. I cannot accept terms I do not understand." "What do you not understand?" She set her hands flat on the table, on either side of the cold soup. "Whether, in the morning," she said very gently, "you will discover that there is a small additional condition, Your Grace, of the kind that gentlemen who have wished to be kind have sometimes discovered in themselves only by morning." She did not look away. He admired her very much for it. "There is no such condition, Miss Reed," he said. "There will not be such a condition. If at any point in your service at Hartwell House you have cause to suspect such a condition is forming in me, I have a man of business, a Mr. Hatherfield, who has been with the family 31 years, and you have only to send Mrs. Cole down with a folded note. The note may say only the word, 'now.' Mr. Hatherfield will know what it means. I have already, in fact, written it to him this evening on the carriage step. I have not yet given him the note. If you accept my offer, I shall give it tonight." "You will give your man of business a note instructing him to take my own house out from under me if I should become a different man between October and Christmas?" "Yes." She looked at him. It was a long look. The room was very quiet. In the passage, Annie had not moved. Mrs. Pell, downstairs, had begun to sing very softly to herself in the kitchen. The kind of unself-conscious singing of a woman who has many things to do, and is making them go faster by being unmusical about them. And the sound came up the stairs, and through the propped-open door, as a far-off, comfortable noise. "Your Grace," Charlotte said. "Yes." "I accept." It was not, then, the strange thing it would become. That came later. That night, when Edmund Fairfax went home to Berkeley Square and wrote out the letter to Mr. Hatherfield, and signed it twice, and sealed it, and sent it round to Hatherfield's lodgings in Lincoln's Inn by the night footman, with instruction that it be opened only if a note arrived afterwards from Hartwell House, signed in Mrs. Cole's hand and bearing the word, "now." The strangest thing he felt was a very plain relief. He had done a foolish thing, perhaps. He had not done a wrong one. The two were not the same. He slept badly, only because he was thinking about coffee. He had not, in the press of the rain and the inn and the cold soup and the cottage at Stoke Fairfax, remembered to ask Mrs. Cole, as he had told himself in the carriage that morning he must, to have it ground a little stronger this autumn than last. He did so in a note left on the breakfast tray, and went down to find his housekeeper waiting in the morning room, with her usual stiff and watchful face, and a list of complaints involving the laundress. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "before you tell me about the laundress, I have engaged a senior housemaid for the upper passages, Miss Charlotte Reed. She is at the Half Moon. The Eton carriage will fetch her at 11. Mrs. Cole laid the laundress's list down very slowly. "Senior housemaid, Your Grace." senior housemaid.
Reference, Your Grace?
My own. She looked at him.
Your Grace, she said. Very good.
She did not move for a moment longer. Then she folded the laundress's list neatly in two and put it in her apron pocket, and turned and went, with no further word, to make up the small north-facing room on the upper floor with new linen, fresh candles, and, Edmund would not learn this for 3 weeks, a little bunch of late October roses in a glass on the washstand, picked from her own private garden plot at the side of the kitchen, which was the highest honor Mrs. Cole had ever paid a member of the household in 22 years of service. Charlotte arrived at 11. She came up the steps of Hartwell House with the borrowed gown rolled in her shawl and her own dry stuff dress beneath it, walked past the footman who had been told to open the door without a name, walked past the marble entrance hall with the painted ceiling she did not look at, walked into the housekeeper's room behind Mrs. Cole as Mrs. Cole said, "We shall begin with the linen press, Miss Reed. His Grace likes the underlinen in the second drawer and not the third, which has been a sore point with us for many years. You will find I keep a list." "Yes, Mrs. Cole." "And his coffee, Miss Reed, is to be ground stronger this autumn than last. That is a new instruction this morning. The undercook is fond of grinding it weak because she likes the smell to last into the afternoon." "Yes, Mrs. Cole." "And his letters, Miss Reed, are to be brought up on the silver salver and not the brass one. The brass one is for tradesmen and is to be kept in the lobby. This has also been a sore point." "Yes, Mrs. Cole." "His Grace dines at home tonight, alone. The dining room is to be laid for one. If you find a place laid for two, you may take it as your duty to remove the second cover yourself before His Grace comes down. We have had certain ladies in the past who have caused a second cover to be laid as a private joke. His Grace does not find it funny. I do not find it funny. The under-butler has been warned. You will not need to do this often. You will, occasionally, need to do it." "Yes, Mrs. Cole." Mrs. Cole looked at her. "Miss Reed." "Mrs. Cole." "His Grace told me at breakfast that the engagement was on his own reference. I have served in this house, in one capacity or another, for 22 years. His Grace has never made me a reference before. I will give you a fortnight to discover whether you intend to deserve it. After the fortnight, if you do, you will find me a friend in this house. If you do not, you will find me a perfectly civil enemy, who will not waste your time pretending otherwise. That is all. You will go now to the linen press." "Yes, Mrs. Cole," said Charlotte, and went to the linen press. 2 days later, in a small post-chaise paid for by the Hartwell private accounts and accompanied by Mr. Hatherfield in person, a very neat, very tidy man of 63, with white hair brushed flat and a great gentleness in his face that did not match his 31 years of work in the law, Mrs. Reed of Pratt Street was moved into the south-walled cottage at Stoke Fairfax. The cottage had 2 ground-floor rooms and a tiny upstairs, a flagged kitchen, a low garden gate, and a chimney that drew well. The late October sun struck the south wall at noon and made it warm enough that the garden roses, half dead from the city, sat up in their pots within the week. The physician at Stoke Fairfax came on the Thursday. He listened to Mrs. Reed's chest for a long time, and then said, in the dry, undeceived voice of a country practitioner, "Mrs. Reed, you have been treated this last winter as if you had a death sentence. You have, on the contrary, a chronic weakness of the lungs which will require warmth, butter, sleep, and the absence of London for the rest of your life. Those 4 things, Mrs. Reed, I can promise you in this cottage. I cannot promise you youth. I can promise you, with reasonable confidence, that you will live to see your daughter married." Mrs. Reed, who had not cried in front of her daughter since the day Charlotte's father had died, cried then, very quietly, into the corner of her shawl. Mr. Hatherfield, who had been pretending to look at the chimney-piece, said gently, "His Grace will be glad to know it, ma'am." Charlotte did not know all of this for some weeks. She knew that her mother was at Stoke Fairfax, in a cottage with a south wall and a chimney that drew well, because a note in Mr. Hatherfield's careful hand was on her pillow on the Tuesday evening. She knew that the physician had been. She knew that a Mrs. Bell from the next farm had been engaged at 12 shillings a week to come in twice a day to manage the fire and the kitchen and the marketing. She knew her mother's first letter from the cottage, which she received on the Friday, read, in a hand made unsteady by the writer's gratitude rather than by her illness. My darling girl, I have slept 11 hours in a row, which I had not thought I should do again. And there is honey, Charlotte, on the breakfast tray. She read the letter standing in the linen passage, with the second drawer of the press open in front of her, and the third drawer closed beside it. And she read it twice, and she folded it small, and she put it in the pocket of her apron, next to the list Mrs. Cole had given her, about the brass salver and the silver one, and she went on with her work. That night, Mrs. Cole, passing the open door of the linen press at 9 o'clock, observed without comment that the underlinen was in the second drawer, and not the third, for the first time in 3 years and a half, and walked on. The first time the Duke of Hartwell spoke to Charlotte after the half-moon, that is, spoke to her as a man speaks rather than as a master assigning a place, was on a Wednesday in the second week of November. He had been late coming in from a sitting of a Lords' Committee that had run hard. The committee was the small private one on the Working Women's Provision Bill, and Lady Grenville had, improbably and unhelpfully, appeared in the Lords' Gallery with a cousin of hers on the committee, and had remained throughout, watching. Edmund had not looked up. He had spoken his piece on the clause about lodging-house protection, and had then, at the end, when his cousin Sir Charles Fairfax had stood up to second a hostile amendment, looked across the chamber at his own cousin's face, and had understood that what he was defending was being argued against, in part, by men of his own blood. He came home in the dark. He did not eat. He went into the library, sat down at his father's old writing table by the south window, set a glass of brandy at his elbow, which he did not touch, and began to write, without method, in the shorthand of a tired man, what he could remember of the lodging-house clause, and what he proposed to do next. He worked for nearly an hour. The fire had been allowed to burn down because the under-butler had said the Duke was not at home. Nobody had told the under-butler, since, that the Duke had come home. The under-butler had gone to bed. The library door opened quietly. Charlotte came in her cap and dress, carrying a brass coal scuttle that was Mrs. Cole's own from the housekeeper's room, and not the lighter one used in the library, because the lighter one was being mended. She saw him. She stopped. Your Grace, forgive me. I was told the library was empty. It is, mostly, he said, distractedly, without looking up. Come in, Miss Reed. The fire is dying. She came forward, knelt at the grate, and began to lay coals in the careful, low fashion that proper households taught in winter. A layer of small first to catch, a layer of larger over, and a piece of kindling crossed at the top. She did not stir up the ash. The fire began to climb. She had been at this work perhaps 3 minutes when Edmund, finishing a sentence, set down his pen and looked across at her properly for the first time that night. He saw that her hair was in the working knot of the first day, that her dress was a little neater than it had been at the inn, that the cool, steady tiredness was still in her face, and that her left wrist, where her sleeve had rolled back as she knelt, had a small healing graze across it, as if she had caught it on a corner of the linen press. He said, Miss Reed. Your Grace? I have been informed this evening, by my cousin Sir Charles Fairfax, with whom I share a grandfather and a name, and apparently very little else, that I am ruining a useful family alliance by pursuing the lodging-house clause. Your Grace, I do not think this is the kind of thing one says to a senior housemaid one has known for 10 days, but I find I have said it. He looked down at his ink. I find I have said it because the under-butler has gone to bed, and the cousin in question has not, in fact, ruined me. And I should like to laugh at the situation with a person who is not Mrs. Cole, who would, I assure you, take notes. He looked up. Charlotte had finished the fire. She set the coal scuttle down. She wiped her hand on the corner of her apron, the way she had wiped it after the soup at the half-moon. Your Grace, she said carefully. Yes. Mrs. Cole would take excellent notes. She did not smile. The cool place in her face had moved a very little. He saw it. He laughed, once, surprised, a dry sound that the room had not heard in some weeks, and he saw, very briefly, the corner of her mouth answer his laugh, before it remembered itself. "Thank you, Miss Reed," he said. "Your Grace. Will you tell Mrs. Cole tomorrow morning that the Duke is at home this evening after all, and that he has not eaten?" "Yes, Your Grace." "And tell her also," he said, "that I should like a tray in 20 minutes, here, of whatever is left in the kitchen, and that I am sorry." "For what, Your Grace?" "For having been the kind of master tonight who comes home and forgets to ring." She picked up the coal scuttle. "That is not the worst kind of master," she said at the door. She went out. He watched the closed door a moment. Then he sat down again to the lodging-house clause and worked, with sudden steadiness, for another hour by the strong, fresh fire. Mrs. Cole brought up the tray herself 20 minutes later and stood while he ate it. "Your Grace." "Mrs. Cole." "Miss Reed will do." He looked up. "Will she?" "She will. The underlinen is in the second drawer. The brass salver has not appeared upstairs since the Tuesday. The undercook has been informed about the coffee twice by Miss Reed, and the second time the undercook ground it stronger. The roses on the upstairs washstand are still alive on the 18th of the month, which is not a thing I have managed in this house in 7 years, because Miss Reed has been changing the water. She has not lost her temper at the under-butler, who deserves it, and she has not yet told me, but she will, in a week or so, if she does not change her mind, that the chimney in the green guest bedroom smokes when the wind is in the east. She has gone, all in all, the wrong way about being a difficulty in this house." "You sound disappointed, Mrs. Cole." "I sound, Your Grace, exactly as much as I sound. I have given her till Christmas. She will do." "Thank you, Mrs. Cole. There is one further matter, Your Grace." "Yes?" "Miss Reed asked me yesterday whether it would be improper of her, in her position, to write a single letter of thanks to a Mr. Hatherfield, whom she has not met. I told her that the rules of the house did not contemplate the question, but that if she chose to send the letter through my hand, I should consider it a private matter, and not a household one. She has sent it. Mr. Hatherfield wrote back this morning. He was, I think the word is, touched, Your Grace. He has not been touched in 20 years that I have observed. Forgive me for bringing it up." "Mrs. Cole." "Your Grace, you may bring up anything in this house at any hour. That is also a new instruction. The under-butler can be informed in the morning." "Very good, Your Grace." She took the tray. She went to the door. She turned at the door. "Your Grace." "Mrs. Cole." "I would not, if I were you, lose her." "I had not," he said, looking down at the half-finished clause on the lodging-house paper. "Considered that I had her, Mrs. Cole. I am her employer." "That, Your Grace," said Mrs. Cole, "is what I observed." She went out. The second time Edmund spoke to Charlotte as a man, rather than as a master, was 3 days later, in the kitchen garden, where she had been sent down with a basket to fetch the last of the autumn lavender for Mrs. Cole's still room. He had come in from the stables, in his old riding coat, without his hat. He saw her at the lavender bed. He stopped at the gate. He was about to turn back. Then he did not. "Miss Reed." "Your Grace." "There is a question I should not, perhaps, ask. I'm going to ask it anyway, because it is a Sunday and there is no one else in the garden, and the under-butler is not, today, taking notes." "Your Grace." "You worked," he said, "at Marbury. Mrs. Spence at Marbury was your housekeeper. Mrs. Spence took her tea from my father when he came north in the August of '11 on the steps of the Marbury Dower House. My father told me, on the way home, that Mrs. Spence was the best plain woman in service in England. Tell me, Miss Reed, what Mrs. Spence said about my father after he had gone." Charlotte looked up from the lavender. She held a sprig of it in her fingers, half cut. The cool place in her face moved a very, very little, and then steadied. She thought. She said, "Mrs. Spence said, Your Grace, and forgive me, that your late father was the only duke she had ever met who had asked her the name of her dog." Edmund laughed. It was not, this time, the surprised, dry laugh of the library. It was a slower laugh that came up out of him the way a lamp comes on, and that hurt a very little, in the way laughing about a missed person always hurts. "What was the dog's name, Miss Reed?" "Brutus, Your Grace." "Of course it was." "He was very small." "Of course he was." She added after a moment, "My father told me, when he was alive, that your father was the only patron at Marbury who paid his clerks on the quarter-day without fail, and did not let the steward send them to him for an answer when the harvest had been thin. That was, please understand me, Your Grace, a kindness of a particular kind in our county. It is remembered." Edmund stood at the gate. The autumn sun was thin. The garden smelled of lavender, last roses, smoke from the gardener's heap 2 beds away. He had not, since his father's funeral 17 months ago, been told that he came from a man who was remembered for paying his clerks. He said, after a minute, "Thank you, Miss Reed." "Your Grace." He came inside the gate. He stood a moment at a distance from her by the rosemary. He said, "Miss Reed, I have a private question. You may decline. I do not, please understand, I do not mean it as an inquiry. Your Grace, how does your mother do?" The cool place in her face did not, this time, tremble. It changed shape, in a way he would think about later. It made room. "She does well, Your Grace," Charlotte said. "She has slept 11 hours in a row, the first night. She has slept 7 since. She has eaten butter at every breakfast. She has written to me twice. The physician believes, he says it cautiously, but he believes it, that the cottage and the warmth and the absence of London air will give her years she would not have had on Pratt Street. She has—" Charlotte's mouth shaped itself around the next word with care, the way the mouth shapes itself around an unfamiliar, borrowed word that may yet break. "She has, Your Grace, become a person who hopes again." "Yes," he said. "Your Grace." "That," he said, "is the only kind of work I have ever wanted to do in the Lords, Miss Reed, and I had begun to forget it." He looked at the lavender, not at her. He said, "Thank you again." "Your Grace," she said, "Hartwell House is— it is—" "Yes?" "It is a great deal warmer than Pratt Street, Your Grace. Forgive me. I meant only that." She did not look up at him. She cut another sprig of lavender. He went out of the garden and into the stables and stood for a long time with his head against the warm flank of his hunter, and could not have said afterwards exactly what he had been thinking. 2 evenings later, in the long, high south drawing-room of the Grenville house on Curzon Street, Lady Grenville received a note. It was brought up to her on a brass salver. Lady Grenville's house used the brass for everything. It was a part of her temperament. And she opened it with a thumbnail of the kind a woman uses when she is in a mood for opening things badly. The note was from her solicitor. It said, with a discretion that did not conceal its alarm, that a man named Mr. Hatherfield had called that afternoon at the solicitor's chambers in Lincoln's Inn, and had asked, with credentials that the solicitor had felt obliged to recognize, to be shown the original draft of a certain morning-room paper drawn up on the 8th of October concerning a certain Miss Reed. The solicitor had not, in fact, allowed Mr. Hatherfield to see the original draft. He had, however, owing to a clerical accident which he very much regretted, allowed Mr. Hatherfield to see the Chambers copy, in his own handwriting in the corner. Mr. Hatherfield had read it once. He had then put on his hat and walked out. He had asked for no copy. He had said nothing. Lady Grenville read the note. She read it twice. She walked, with the note in her hand, the length of her own south drawing-room, and stood for some time at the far window looking out at Curzon Street, where the lamplighter was just beginning his round. She turned. She rang the bell. The butler in plum livery, who had been her butler for 18 years and whose name was Mr. Poke, came in and stood with his hands behind his back. "Mr. Poke," said Lady Grenville. "My lady." "How long," she said, "have you known me?" 18 years, my lady." "Have you ever, in 18 years, known me to lose?" "No, my lady." "Then I am not about to begin," she said, "with a senior housemaid. Send round to my cousin Lord Resford in the morning. I shall require his attendance at the autumn session." "Yes, my lady." "And Mr. Poke." "My lady." "You will give it to be understood, in the proper quarters, that Miss Reed, who is, I am told, presently in service in Berkeley Square, is a young person of irregular conduct, who was lately turned off from this house for that reason. You will give it to be understood, Mr. Poke, in a tone of regret rather than malice. I find malice always carries a smell." "Yes, my lady." He turned to go. She did not turn back to the window. She walked, instead, to a small inlaid table that stood in the corner of the south drawing-room, and that nobody but Lady Grenville's housekeeper of 20 years ever dusted. On the table, in a small, velvet-lined, gilt-edged frame the size of her palm, was a miniature of a fair-haired young man in the uniform of a captain of the King's German Legion, painted in 1812 by an itinerant German master in Hanover, and brought back to England in 1813 by a Major Whitstone with the Major's regrets. Lady Grenville picked up the miniature. She held it flat in her hand. The lamp in the drawing-room was already lit, and the light made the painted face very young. Her thumb moved, slowly, across the painted cheek, the way the thumb of a woman who has done this many years moves over a thing she has stopped pretending not to come to in the evenings. She did not stop the movement. She was not, this evening, observed. She was alone in the long, high south drawing-room of her own house, with the lamp on, and the curtain not drawn against Curzon Street, and the note from her solicitor on the windowsill, where she had set it down. She did not, alone in her own drawing-room, with the miniature in her hand and her thumb moving as it moved, weep. She had not wept in 18 years. She had not wept, in fact, since the Major Whitstone had stood in the front hall of this house in February of 1813, with the miniature in his hand, and his hat under his arm, and his regrets. She stood a moment longer. Then she put the miniature back upon the inlaid table. She turned, and pinched out the lamp herself with 2 fingers, and walked out of the drawing-room without ringing for a footman, and shut the door behind her. In the passage outside the south drawing-room, on a small chair set against the wall, sat a young woman in the grey dress and white cap of a Grenville chambermaid, a girl of 19, recently promoted from the scullery, who had been waiting with a folded note from the housekeeper that her ladyship had not yet rung for. The girl rose at once when Lady Grenville came out, and dropped a curtsy and held the note out. Lady Grenville did not take it. She walked past the girl without seeing her, with a face that the girl, who had not been 17 in February of 1813, and so did not understand what she was looking at, would describe later in the scullery as the face of her ladyship's bad days. The girl took the note back upstairs. She mentioned it to nobody. 3 days later, at the end of her first half-day, she walked all the way from Curzon Street to Berkeley Square in the cold, because a friend of her sister's, who had been a kitchen maid at Grenville 2 years before, and was now in the kitchen at Hartwell House, had said, in a sentence the girl had been thinking about for a fortnight, that the housekeeper at Hartwell House was hard, but did not have what her ladyship had, which was a face that came out of certain rooms. The girl asked, at the area door of Hartwell House, for a Miss Reed. It was, again, raining. This time it was the slow, steady November rain that gets into the wool of a coat and stays there for days, and the girl from Grenville's, whose name was Susan Marshall, and who would, in time, become Mrs. Cole's particular project, and rise to upper housemaid at Hartwell House by the spring, was wet to the elbows by the time Charlotte came down to the area door. Charlotte looked at the girl. Charlotte said, "You had better come in, Susan." She had not seen Susan since the morning of the 8th of October, when Susan had brought her tea up to the box room under the eaves, while the footman was downstairs reporting the letters. She remembered, too, that Susan had set the tea down without comment and had touched her, very briefly, on the shoulder, and had not stayed. Charlotte took Susan into the kitchen passage, sat her by the kitchen fire, gave her a cup of tea on Mrs. Cole's tacit authority, because Mrs. Cole was upstairs, and Charlotte had learned by now what Mrs. Cole would tacitly permit, and listened. Susan, with her hands round the cup, and her wet shoes steaming in front of the kitchen grate, told her, quietly, in a voice that the kitchen maid 2 stalls down could not have overheard, about Mr. Polk's instructions in the proper quarters, in a tone of regret rather than malice. She told her that Lord Resford had been sent for. She told her that her ladyship had been seen in the south drawing-room with the miniature in her hand, and that her ladyship had pinched out the lamp herself. She told her, finally, because she had thought about this on the long walk to Berkeley Square, and she had decided that the part Charlotte should know was the part about the paper, that the morning-room confession of the 8th of October had been drawn up before Charlotte had been called down to the morning-room at all. It had been in the clerk's portfolio at 11, and the conversation with her ladyship had been at noon. "Susan," said Charlotte, after a while. "Miss Reed, why have you come to tell me this?" The girl looked at the fire. She said, "Because the morning my mother died, 4 years ago. You were not at Grenville then, you were at Marbury. Your father wrote to my father, who had been steward at the Marbury home farm, to ask whether there was anything my family needed in the next month. Your father did not know my father very well. He had stood by him once at a hiring fair. He wrote anyway. I thought, Miss Reed, that perhaps I should write back, in a way." Charlotte did not, in front of Susan, weep. She said, "Susan, you will not go back to Curzon Street tonight. Miss Reed, you will not. Mrs. Cole will arrange you a bed tonight in the room next to mine. It is a half-empty room, and you will not be missed at Grenville's till morning. And by morning, we will know what to do. Drink the tea. Stay by the fire. I will come back for you in 20 minutes. She went up the kitchen stairs. She went to the housekeeper's room. She found Mrs. Cole at her desk, writing out the next quarter's wages. She said, "Mrs. Cole." Mrs. Cole, without looking up, "Miss Reed? There is a girl in the kitchen who has walked from Curzon Street." "Yes." "She brings news of Lady Grenville." "Yes." "Some of which His Grace, I think, should be told this evening." Mrs. Cole set down her pen. She looked at Charlotte for a long moment. She said, "Miss Reed, that is the first time you have come to me with a thing you did not already know how to do yourself." I take it," said Mrs. Cole, "as a compliment to my office. Wait here 10 minutes. I shall go to His Grace." She went out. Charlotte stood in the housekeeper's room, with the wages book open on the desk and the candle still burning, and looked, for the first time since the night of the 8th of October, very much as she had looked at the door of the Grenville house in the rain, except that this time she did not lower her head. It was at this point that the season began properly to move. The lodging house clause in the Working Women's Provision Bill came up for its first reading on the Monday. Edmund spoke for an hour. Lord Resford spoke against, with what Edmund would have called, in private, a borrowed conviction. The Lord Chancellor watched, dryly. The clause passed its first reading by 9 votes. The second reading was set down for the second week of December. On the Tuesday, in a manner the household understood without being told, Susan Marshall was offered a position at Hartwell House, under Mrs. Cole's authority, on the condition, which Mrs. Cole stated without consulting anyone, that she be permitted to send her wages, for as long as her mother lived, to a particular sister in Battersea, and on the further condition that, 3 months in, she might write a perfectly civil letter of resignation to Mr. Polk in plum livery, without a request for a character, the request itself being the message. Susan accepted. Mrs. Cole did not comment on the precedent. On the Wednesday, in the late morning, Charlotte was called down to the housekeeper's room to find Mr. Hatherfield sitting in the visitor's chair with his hat on his knee and a small folded paper in his hand. He rose when she came in. "Miss Reed."
Mr. Hatherfield?
"I should like to introduce myself in person at last," he said, "and to thank you for the letter. I have not received a letter of that kind in 20 years, Miss Reed. I do not now expect to receive another. It is one of the small, great things of my life. I shall keep it."
Mr. Hatherfield.
"There is a further matter." He held out the folded paper. It was small, of a kind of writing paper that Charlotte did not at once recognize. She took it. "What is it, Mr. Hatherfield?" "It is," he said, "the note that His Grace wrote on the carriage step on the evening of the 8th of October, and gave to me the same night, with the instruction that I open and act upon it if a separate note from Mrs. Cole reached me afterwards. No such separate note has reached me. I have not opened the note that His Grace gave me. He gave it sealed, and I have kept it sealed. It is yours, Miss Reed. His Grace was clear, in conversation with me yesterday, that it should be." She held the small folded paper. "Why?" she said. Mr. Hatherfield looked at her with a great gentleness. "Because, Miss Reed," he said, "His Grace would like you to know, without his having to say so to you in person, which I gather neither of you would manage well, that the note is yours, to keep or to burn or to read, exactly as you choose. He does not ask which you have done. He would only like you to have the choice." She held the paper a moment. Then she did not open it. She did not, in front of Mr. Hatherfield, burn it either. She put it carefully in the inner pocket of her apron, beside the list about the brass salver, and laid both hands flat for a moment on the table in front of her. She said, "Mr. Hatherfield, will you tell His Grace—" "No, Miss Reed." She looked up. "Forgive me," he said, even more gently. "He did not ask me to bring back a message. If you have one for him, you will say it to him yourself when you are ready. I am only a man of business, Miss Reed. I do not, today, carry post." He took up his hat. He bowed. He went out. She stood very still in the housekeeper's room, with her hands flat on the table for a long time. She found him that evening in the library. He was again at the south writing table. He had again worked his fire down by not asking for coal. She came in without the coal scuttle. "Your Grace?" He looked up. He had not, this last fortnight, looked up without something coming briefly into his face. He caught himself at it now, as he had caught himself at it a half a dozen times in the late November days, and he tried to keep the something out, and failed. "Miss Reed?" "Forgive me. I have not come with the fire. The coal scuttle is at the door, if you should want it." "You have come with—" "I have come, Your Grace, with the answer to a note." He set down his pen. He did not say which note. He waited. She said, "I have not opened it. I do not propose to open it. I do not think I need to. I should like, with your permission, to keep it." He looked at her. He said, and his voice was not the dry, distracted voice of the library, but a voice that he had not used since his father's funeral 17 months before, "Miss Reed." "Your Grace." I do not require an answer of any kind. Mr. Hatherfield will have told you so." "He did, Your Grace. I have given you an answer anyway. I should like, please, to be permitted to keep the note." "Permitted?" "Permitted, Your Grace. It is your house. It is your name on the paper. I am a senior housemaid in your service. I am offering you the courtesy of asking, although Mr. Hatherfield told me very kindly that I did not need to ask. I should like to ask anyway." She said this without looking down. The cool place in her face had become, this evening, a kind of grave, clear pool, the surface of which had not so much as a single ripple in it. He stood up from the writing table. He came round to the front of it. He did not come closer than the corner of the fire screen. He stopped there, "Miss Reed," he said, "I'm going to say something I should not."
You will not, Your Grace, if I ask you not to.
You may ask. She did not immediately. She thought. She said,
Will the thing you are about to say, Your Grace, alter the terms of my employment in this house?
"It will not. The terms of your employment will not change in this house unless you, Miss Reed, choose at some point to leave my service of your own will, in which case Mr. Hatherfield has standing instructions about the cottage and your mother that he will carry out without reference to me. The terms, I mean, are set apart from anything I may say to you. They will not move."
Then, she said, Your Grace, you may say it.
He looked into the fire. He said, "I had not expected to be glad of November this year. I had expected to spend the autumn working at the bill and being uneasy about my cousin and being tired by the Lord Chancellor. I had not expected to come downstairs in the evenings and to find the underlinen in the second drawer because you put it there, and the coffee strong because you stood over the undercook, and the silver salver in the hall because you told the underbutler twice. I had not expected to come into the library at 9 o'clock at night and find a fire that was being laid by someone who had thought about who she was laying it for. I had not expected to be told that my father paid his clerks on the quarter day. I had not expected, Miss Reed, to be told it by you. I am very far from saying, please understand me, what I have not the right to say at this hour, in this room, to a woman who has worked under my roof for a month. I am only saying that I am glad. I am saying it because I should be sorry, in 2 years, in 5 years, to discover that I had not." She did not answer at once. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Reed," she said very steadily, "I have not opened the note. I shall not, I think, ever open the note. But I should like you to know, Your Grace, that the reason I do not open it is not because I doubt it. It is because I do not need it. I knew it on the 8th of October, in the front parlour of the Half Moon. I knew it on the Sunday in the kitchen garden. I knew it when I read my mother's letter from the cottage on the Friday, and I put it in my apron pocket next to Mrs. Cole's list. The note is not the proof, Your Grace. The note is, for me, only the courtesy. I should like to be permitted to keep it for that." He looked at her. He said, "Charlotte." It was the first time he had used her Christian name. She heard it. She did not, in front of him, lower her head. She did not weep. The cool, clear pool in her face, after a long moment, made a single circle on its surface, and then was still. "Edmund," she said very softly, "I should not say that." "Not yet. Not yet." He did not, then, cross the corner of the fire screen. He bowed, the way he would have bowed to a baroness at the head of a Wiltshire dinner table. A deliberate, quiet, full bow. He went back to the writing table. He sat down. He took up his pen. She walked, with the coal scuttle she had not brought in, very slowly to the door. At the door she said, "Your Grace, may I come in tomorrow evening with the fire?" "Yes." "Thank you, Your Grace." She went out. It was on the second Friday in December that Lady Grenville's letter arrived. It came in the Morning Post on the brass salver, because the underbutler, for whom the lessons of the autumn had been a matter of slow accretion, was still, in moments of distraction, putting tradesmen's letters on the brass and personal letters on the silver indifferently, and a folded note in an unfamiliar hand had gone into the wrong tray. Mrs. Cole had found it 20 minutes later. She had brought it up herself. Edmund read it standing up by the window of the morning room. The letter was very short. It said that her ladyship had, with great pain, and after much reflection, decided that her duty to the public required of her the publication, that week, of a brief but particular statement concerning the late dismissal from her own house of a certain young woman now in his Grace's service. That her ladyship enclosed for his Grace's information a copy of the said young woman's signed admission of improper conduct with an unnamed gentleman of the Grenville household, written and signed in her own hand on the 8th of October last, that her ladyship felt herself obliged, before publication, to give his grace the courtesy of 48 hours to consider the wisdom of his continued personal interest in the Working Women's Provision Bill, given the circumstance, and that her ladyship remained, with regret, his grace's most obedient servant. A second folded paper was pinned to the letter. It was a confession, short, neat, written in a clerk's hand, and signed at the foot, in a hand that, to a man who had seen Charlotte's apron list and her note to Mr. Hatherfield, and the small, careful inscription she had written on the inside cover of the household management ledger, was very nearly Charlotte's hand, but not Charlotte's hand. The forgery was not crude. It was good enough that 9 men in 10, in print in a daily newspaper at breakfast, would not see the difference. It was good enough that a man's parliamentary cousin, in a London club, would not see it either. Edmund read both papers twice. He folded them very carefully. He said to Mrs. Cole quietly, "Where is Miss Reed?" "In the linen passage, Your Grace." "You will not please tell her of the letter for the present. You will go on with the morning. I shall be out of the house for 2 hours. I shall be back by 1. After 1, I shall require you to find a reason, a true reason, to send Miss Reed up to the south drawing-room. I shall be there. That will be all. Your Grace." He went out, with the letter and the forgery in the inside pocket of his coat. He went, by carriage, to Lincoln's Inn, where he sat with Mr. Hatherfield for 40 minutes, and from there to Bow Street, where, on the strength of a separate inquiry begun nearly 3 weeks earlier, and of certain papers Mr. Hatherfield had quietly retained from the chambers of Lady Grenville's solicitor in the matter of the morning-room confession of the 8th of October, he met a particular officer of the magistracy he had had occasion to trust before, and from there to the Half Moon Street Inn, where Mrs. Pell, without being asked, made up a private room and sent for 2 clerks of his cousin Sir Charles Fairfax's acquaintance, who had not, when consulted carefully on the question, found themselves at all in disagreement with the Duke, and from there back to Berkeley Square, where he arrived at 5 minutes before 1 o'clock, walked through his own front hall without speaking to the under-butler, went up to the south drawing-room on the first floor, sat down at the small writing desk by the window, and rang the bell. Mrs. Cole, who had been waiting for the bell, was in the doorway 30 seconds later. "Miss Reed, please," he said. Charlotte came up. She came in cap and apron, her hair in the working knot, with the dust of the linen passage on her sleeve where her sleeve had caught the corner of the second drawer. She had not, today, eaten anything since 6 in the morning. She did not know it. She had been busy. "Your Grace." "Miss Reed, sit, please." She did not sit. She stood at the corner of the writing desk, with her hands held in front of her, because she had not been sat down in a drawing-room of Hartwell House before, and she was, in her own person, still a senior housemaid who had been called up. "Sit, Miss Reed." She sat then, on the upright chair at the corner of the writing desk. He laid Lady Grenville's letter, with the forged paper pinned to it, in front of her. He said, "I shall not ask whether you wrote this. I have known for some weeks that you did not. I shall not, in any conversation we have in this room or any other room, ask you to deny it. I require, please, that you read it, that you read the second paper, and that you tell me, when you have read it, what you would prefer me to do." She read. She did not speak for some time. She read once. She read a second time. She turned the second paper over, very slowly, and turned it back. She read the foot of the page, where her, not her name, had been written. She closed her eyes for half a second. She opened them. She set the papers down. She said, "Your Grace." "Yes." "I am very tired." "I know." She stopped. She made the cool place in her face hold. "My mother." "Will not, Miss Reed, see this paper in any form." Mr. Hatherfield went on the carriage from Lincoln's Inn at 11:30. He will be at Stoke Fairfax by dark. He will explain to your mother what has been said. He will explain that her ladyship has been put under such restraint as the case will admit. He will sit with your mother until she has put it away. I would have gone myself, Miss Reed. I considered it. I am, in the end, the man who must be in the south drawing room of this house when you came up the stairs. I sent the man your mother wrote her thank you letter to.
Yes, she said.
Yes. I would have liked you to be there, Your Grace. I would have liked it, Miss Reed, also. She set her hands on the writing desk on either side of the papers.
What, she said, would you have me do?
He said, whatever you would have me do, I will do. I will do it tonight, or at the second reading of the bill on Tuesday, or in the next number of the Morning Post, or all three. I am not afraid of any of the three. The bill will pass. If it does not pass tomorrow, it will pass on Wednesday. Lord Resford will not, by Monday, be voting with her ladyship. That is settled, regardless. The thing that is not settled is what you would wish me to do about her. I have a thing I should like to do. I should not like to do it without your knowledge.
What is the thing, Your Grace?
He told her. He told her about Bow Street. He told her about the original draft of the morning room confession in Lady Grenville's solicitor's chambers, in a hand which was nearly Charlotte's hand, but not Charlotte's hand, and which was, in fact, as the solicitor's clerk had, with reluctance, confirmed under oath that morning at Bow Street, in Lady Grenville's own hand, drafted at her direction on the 7th of October, the day before the morning room conversation. He told her that Lady Grenville had, in addition, instructed Mr. Polk to put it about in the proper quarters in a tone of regret, rather than malice, that Charlotte was a young person of irregular conduct, and that Susan Marshall had walked from Curzon Street to Berkeley Square in the rain to say so. He told her that the magistrate at Bow Street had been content, on the strength of the solicitor's clerk's statement, and Susan's affidavit and the late delivery to Hartwell House this morning of a forged paper signed in another woman's name, to consider the matter a private criminal one rather than a private parliamentary one. The magistrate had thought, as Edmund had thought, that a private criminal matter might be settled best by a private criminal letter, written by Lady Grenville to Charlotte herself, withdrawing every word of the morning room confession, and of the publication statement, and of the letter to him this morning, and authorizing its placement, sealed and unread by her, in his own hand, at Hartwell House, for Charlotte to read or to burn at her pleasure. That is the thing, he said. I have already obtained from the magistrate the warrant which I would prefer not to have served. I have not been to Curzon Street. I have come to you first. She listened. He thought, watching her. This is a woman to whom no man has thought to come first in any matter in a long time, perhaps in all her life. And I am not, it occurs to me, the man I had been intending to be. But I am today the man she has caused me to be. Good. She said, Your Grace? Yes.
I should like you to go to her with the warrant in your pocket.
Yes.
I should like you to give her the chance, in her own drawing room, before the warrant is served, to write the letter and to walk into Hartwell House next Tuesday morning and lay it in my hand.
In your hand?
In my hand, Your Grace, not on the salver, not into yours. I should like her, please, to give it to me.
That can be done.
And after the letter is in my hand, said Charlotte, I should like her, for the rest of her life, Your Grace, never to have to look at it again. I should not like to be cruel to her. I should not like, for myself, the kind of life that comes of being cruel to a person who has done me a wrong. I should like, if you will, to have the original draft from the solicitor's chambers placed sealed in a drawer of Mr. Hatherfield's, to be opened only if she should, at any time hereafter, say a single word against me again in any room in London, in which case the draft would be sent, very quietly, to a member of her own family. That is what I should like.
He looked at her. Charlotte, he said, that is a more difficult arrangement to manage than the warrant.
I know, Your Grace.
You have considered it, even so.
I have considered it, Edmund.
He said nothing for a moment. He said, It will be done, in that way. I shall go this afternoon. Mr. Hatherfield will keep the draft in the drawer.
Thank you, Your Grace.
Charlotte.
Yes?
After this is settled, after the second reading on Tuesday, after your mother has had her quiet winter, I should like, at a time, please, that you choose, in a room you choose, to ask you a question.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, Your Grace. Ask me then. I shall answer then.
She rose. She did not, this time, curtsy. She went out of the south drawing-room of Hartwell House and down the stairs very quietly, in her cap and her apron with the dust of the linen passage on her sleeve, and Mrs. Cole, passing her in the hall, did not stop her, only looked at her face once, sharply, and went on, and laid a hand for a moment on the banister. Edmund went to Curzon Street that afternoon. He did not take Mr. Hatherfield. He took the Bow Street officer in plain clothes in his own carriage, and left the officer sitting in the carriage at the corner of Half Moon Street with the warrant in his coat. He walked the last 50 yards. He was admitted by Mr. Polk in plum livery, who did not, on this occasion, meet his eye. He was shown up to the south drawing-room. Lady Grenville rose from her chair.
Your Grace.
My lady. She had had her hair done that morning in the high evening style. She was wearing a gown of dark amber silk that she would not, in the ordinary way, have worn in the afternoon. She had drawn the curtains a little against the December light. She had had the lamp lit. She had taken, herself, a position by the inlaid table at the corner, with one hand resting upon it. She had prepared the room, as a general prepares the ground. She did not, however, look at the inlaid table. The miniature was not on it. It had been put away that morning. He saw the small clean square where the gilt frame had been. He saw it because he had been told, by Susan Marshall, through Charlotte, through Mrs. Cole, where it had stood. He said, My lady, I have come on a matter which I should like to dispose of without raising my voice, or yours. You will permit me to be plain?
Pray be plain, Your Grace.
I have in this pocket, he said, with 2 fingers on the outside of his coat, a warrant from the magistrate at Bow Street, in the matter of a forged paper delivered to my house this morning, of a draft of the same paper recovered from your solicitor's chambers, of an affidavit of one of your own staff, and of a fraudulent letter of dismissal of the 8th of October last. I have in this other pocket a sheet of writing paper, an envelope, and a pen. I would much rather, my lady, that you used the second pocket than that I served the first. She looked at him a moment. You are very young, Your Grace.
I have been told.
You believe, I take it, that you have made me afraid.
I do not think I have, my lady. I do not particularly require to. I require only that the paper from your solicitor's chambers be placed in a drawer of Mr. Hatherfield's, that the original draft be kept there for the rest of your life, and never produced, unless you cause it to be produced, by speaking of Miss Reed in any form, in any room in London, and that you write to Miss Reed yourself, at this writing desk, at this hour, in your own hand, a withdrawal of every word of the morning-room confession, every word of the proposed publication statement, and every word of the letter you sent me this morning. You will place that withdrawal sealed in my hand for delivery into Miss Reed's hand at Hartwell House on Tuesday morning. After Tuesday morning, my lady, you will not be asked for anything else, by me or by Miss Reed. Ever. You will not be asked for an apology in any public form. You will not be asked for an apology in any private form, beyond the one I shall now require from you in this room. Your name will not appear in connection with her name. The bill will pass without your support. That is no longer your decision to make. I shall not, after this afternoon, mention any of this to any man at any table. Neither will Miss Reed. Neither will Mr. Hatherfield. Neither, my lady, will you. That is the offer. She looked at him a long, long moment. She said, Your Grace. My lady. Will you tell me, please, what you think a withdrawal of words is worth to me? I think, my lady, he said very quietly, that it is worth, to you, the use for the rest of your life of your own south drawing room as a private place. I think it is worth the freedom of being able to take down the miniature from the inlaid table in the evening, when you choose, in any year you choose, with the lamp lit, without the fear that any servant of yours has been instructed by you, in the meantime, to ruin a young woman with whom that miniature has nothing on earth to do. I think it is worth the price of leaving Miss Reed alone, my lady, with the man, with the mother, with the bill, and with the senior housemaid's wages of £26 a year that she earned, and that you try to take from her without a character. I think that is what it is worth to you. I think, she said, after a moment, I think you have been overhearing servants, Your Grace. I have been listening to one, my lady. You will not say her name again in this room. I had not intended to. I require you to write the withdrawal. After the withdrawal, you will not have to hear her name. She walked, then, to the writing desk at the window. Not the one she had chosen as her ground, but the small one in the recess. She sat down. She drew off her right glove very slowly, finger by finger. She picked up the pen. The pen nib was bad. She put it down. She took up a second pen. She wrote, with the kind of steadiness that comes of having been a great house's mistress for 43 years, and of knowing very well how to write a sentence one does not wish to write. 4 short, careful paragraphs. She did not read them over. She folded the page. She sealed it with her own seal, which was the Grenville arms, and she did the seal twice, because the first impression smudged. She held the sealed letter out. He took it. "My lady," he said. "Thank you. You will leave my house, Your Grace. At once. You will not call again. I have no occasion to. Your Grace." "My lady." She looked at him. She said, very quietly, "I should not, perhaps, have done what I did about the cottage. The cottage was the part that, I am told, I should not, perhaps, have done. The remainder of the conduct of the 8th of October I do not retract in my own mind, Your Grace, whatever I have just written. You will understand that I cannot. The cottage I retract. Tell her ladyship, tell her that I should not have written into the morning-room confession the line about her mother. The line about her mother was beneath me." He looked at her. He understood that she had said, in the language available to her, the only apology she would ever say in her life to anyone, and that she had said it because, for a single moment in the south drawing-room of her own house, with the miniature put away in the inlaid table, she had been a woman who had once stood in this front hall, in February of 1813, with the lamp lit and a man's hat on the inlaid table, and a piece of news in the air, and had understood for the first time what was meant by the line about her mother in any morning-room confession ever drawn up about any housemaid in any London house at any hour. He bowed. He went out. The second reading of the Working Women's Provision Bill passed the Lords on Tuesday the 17th of December by a majority of 17 votes. Lord Resford did not speak. Lady Grenville was not in the gallery. The Lord Chancellor, in the chair, looked across the chamber at Edmund Fairfax twice during the division. The second time he very slightly inclined his head, in a gesture nobody in the visitors' gallery would have caught, except that the under-butler from Hartwell House, who had been brought along for the day by Mr. Hatherfield, in part as a lesson, and in part as a treat, was standing at the rail and did, in fact, catch it. Edmund came home at 6. Lady Grenville's sealed letter, withdrawn by him from his pocket, was placed on the silver salver in the hall. On the silver salver, because it was a personal matter, and the silver salver was carried up to the south drawing-room by Charlotte Reed, in her cap and apron, with the working knot in her hair. He had asked her to bring it up herself. She had asked Mrs. Cole, and Mrs. Cole had said, with great composure, "Yes, Miss Reed, you will bring it up yourself." Charlotte came into the south drawing-room. She came to the writing desk. He took the letter from the salver. He broke the seal. He read the 4 short paragraphs. He passed the letter to her. She read it twice. The cool place in her face did not, this time, do anything at all. It had moved over now into a different geography, in which the act of being unsurprised by a piece of paper was a small, habitual thing. She set the letter down. "Your Grace." "Charlotte." She drew a breath. "I have been thinking," she said, "for some weeks, about a thing that I had not, in October, thought I should be permitted to think about. I have been thinking about it because of the south drawing room, and the underlinen, and the kitchen garden in the lavender, and the carriage step. I have been thinking about it because of my mother, who has written this week to say that she has been outside the cottage as far as the south wall 4 times since the frost set in. I have been thinking about it because of you, Edmund." He said, "Yes. You said you would ask me a question." "I did. I shall save you the asking, Your Grace, because if you ask me I shall cry, and I have been making it a particular point of pride for the last 11 weeks not to cry in your house." He laughed then. It was the slow laugh of the kitchen garden, but louder, and it brought tears into his eyes, which it had not done before in his own south drawing room. She said, "Yes, Edmund. Yes." He came round the writing desk. He stopped at 1 pace from her. He held out 1 hand. She took it. That was the end of the autumn session, in any way that mattered. It was raining on Curzon Street on the 8th of October the following year, as it had been raining on the 8th of October the year before. It was not, this time, the impatient, sideways October rain. It was a steady country rain, Berkshire rain, that had got into London and was making the best of it. And it had been falling since 7 that morning, when Mrs. Cole, on the steps of Hartwell House, had stood with her umbrella up and watched Edmund Fairfax and his wife, the Duchess of Hartwell, climb into the travelling carriage that would carry them down to Stoke Fairfax for the week. In the carriage, on her knee, Charlotte had a small bound bundle, not the lumpy shawl of an October a year ago, but a particular packet of letters that had come up from Stoke Fairfax during the autumn, from her mother, and one further from the village physician. The physician had written that Mrs. Reed had passed a quiet summer, that she was eating butter at every breakfast, that she was now walking as far as the orchard in the late afternoons, and that he would be very surprised if she did not see, in the proper course of things, his Grace's firstborn child. Charlotte was carrying, also, 2 letters from Mr. Hatherfield. The first was a routine note about the rents at Stoke Fairfax. The second, more recent, said that a certain drawer in Mr. Hatherfield's office had been opened for the first time that summer on receipt of certain very precise instructions, and that the draft formerly retained there had been forwarded, sealed, unread by him, to a member of a certain lady's own family in Yorkshire, in answer to a single sentence that had been spoken at a dinner table in Bath in July by the lady in question, about a young person of irregular conduct now in his Grace's service. The drawer was now empty. The drawer would, Mr. Hatherfield wrote, remain empty. The lady had been informed of the forwarding. The lady had not, in 8 weeks since, said a further word. Charlotte read this letter once. She folded it. She did not give it to Edmund. She would, in time. She would give it to him, she thought, on the south wall at Stoke Fairfax, when her mother was inside and the orchard was full of late pears, and they were walking together. Or perhaps she would not, because Edmund did not, in his married life, very much like to think about Lady Grenville, and Charlotte was no longer sure that she did either. She looked up. "Edmund," she said. "Yes?" "There is the corner where you stopped the carriage." He looked out. It was Curzon Street. It was, exactly, the spot. The second house from the corner, the wet pavement, the small iron rail. The plum-coated butler was not on the step today. Mr. Polk had retired in the spring on a pension that Lady Grenville had been heard to call generous. The front door was shut. The house looked, with its drawn-back curtains and its newly painted railings, like any other house. "Edmund," she said. "Yes." I never told you, did I? Told me what? What I would have said, she said, if you had not stopped the carriage. He turned to her. He took her gloved hand off her knee and laid his own, briefly, over the bundle of letters and her hand together. What would you have said, my love? She did not answer at once. She watched the second house from the corner go past the carriage window, the wet pavement go past, the small iron rail go past. She thought of a woman in a grey stuff dress and a white cap, with the rain on her bare head, and a bundle the size of half a drawer at her side, looking up at the sky, as if something there might tell her where to go next. I should have said, she said at last, in front of the iron rail to the empty street. I do not know where to go, but I shall, in the next minute, take one step. Yes. And I should have taken it, Edmund. I know, he said. You stopped the carriage before the step? Yes. I have been, she said, for a year very glad of that. He did not say anything to that. He held her hand. The carriage turned the corner of Curzon Street. Through the rain-streaked window, on the wet stone of the second house from the corner, where, in October of the year before, a young woman had stood with the rain on her hair and her mind made up not to weep, a sparrow on the iron rail picked at a crumb of bread and lifted and flew across the street. Yes, said the Duchess of Hartwell in her travelling cloak, with the bundle of letters and the gloved hand of the man who had stopped the carriage on her knee. Yes, that is exactly the corner. The carriage went on towards Stoke Fairfax in the steady country rain.